Welcome to Modern Financial Wellness, the podcast dedicated to helping you feel better about your finances. I'm your host, Jim Grace, and I'll be your guide as we discuss the psychology of money and explore the emotional aspects that shape our financial decisions and how we feel about them. A quick note before we start, although I do hope that you find the information on this show to be helpful, in no way are any of these discussions to be taken as specific financial advice. Please do your own research and talk to your own advisors, especially when making important financial decisions. All right, Allen Mueller, thanks for joining us on Modern Financial Wellness, man. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, excited to be here. Appreciate the opportunity, Jim.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to talking to you, and I've been trying to find somebody to have a conversation about FIRE with for a long time. So I'm excited to dig in. Before we jump right in, do you want to tell people a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do?
Yeah, I'll take about 3 minutes and give the story. So, I describe myself as an engineer turned finance nerd. So. Went to school for engineering, did that for a few years. As soon as I got into the workforce, I realized pretty quickly that sitting in a cubicle for the next 40 years wasn't really going to be that exciting for me, and tried to figure out ways to get outside, kind of bypass that and make that not my reality. So, after a few years in the career, stumbled upon these financial independence, retire early blogs, the FIRE movement. And there's podcasts, there's blogs, there's books. Really just kind of dove into that head first and, started doing the spreadsheets and the math and ran home to my wife, hey, if we, invest X amount per month, we can be millionaires by this date and we can have work optional by this date. And then we can, just quit these jobs that we don't really like and we can do whatever we want with our time. So that's kind of the whole idea.
Mm-hmm. And when was this? When did you start thinking about FIRE or stumble upon this?
I guess I must have been about 27, 28 years old. So probably about 5 years into the workforce, just kind of getting that first round of dissatisfaction and figuring out how to get... Were you
literally in a cubicle?
Yeah. It was totally a cubicle job. So
stereotypical, finding FIRE in the middle of a cubicle.
Exactly. And the thing about it was there's no flexibility. This was way before work from home and COVID and everything. So it was your butt is in the seat 8 to 5 every day, no matter what. So that was a big part of it too, was just kind of the lack of flexibility. Ultimately I think it was a desire for control of my time that really pushed me towards, really wanting to escape the rat race in my 40s. And, during that time I was going back to school for an MBA. So kind of just advanced my professional career. And throughout that whole process, I just got super interested in accounting, finance, economics, and was wow, this is super interesting stuff to me. I want to learn more about this. So, actually made a pivot professionally to corporate finance, instead of engineering, and, just kept researching, kept reading, remained passionate about it on the personal finance side, but, started doing the CFA curriculum, as professional development just because I was interested in it, and just kind of went down that rabbit hole. So it was just head down, grind it out until early 40s when we can just retire and do whatever we want. What kind of flipped that all on its head for me was COVID. So, as everybody's well aware, we had a lot of extra time to sit around and think. There was no commute. There was no sitting in an office. It was we were just home, with our thoughts. And, we had probably about 7-8 years to go on our FIRE timeline at that point. And I just decided life is short. People are dying all over the place. I don't know if I'm going to get this virus and die when I'm 35. So I was I don't want to waste the next 7 or 8 years doing something I don't want to be doing. So I need to make a pivot. And, there's some financial planners that I knew professionally. And I was this is something I've always been thinking about. Can you kind of walk me through it? What does it look like? How do you run your business? All these sorts of things. And, some of them were very generous with their time. And as soon as I, did screen shares with them and they walked me through the process, I was this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And kind of pivoted and said, okay, instead of just trying to get out of this cubicle job that I don't want to be in. I'm actually going to find something that I want to do and something that I don't want to retire from. So that's what financial planning is for me. That's why I decided to start my firm a year ago, and the rest is history.
That's awesome. And congratulations on the firm and the success so far.
Yeah, thank you.
I was eager to talk to you specifically because of the journey and kind of the path that brought you to the point that you're at right now. And I find it really cool that, not only are you not taking that original route, which was to grind it out and kind of go down that kind of typical FIRE path where maybe you're quitting something and retiring and just being financially independent, but you found something that you're passionate about. And coincidentally, you can directly help others go down a similar path, right? And find their own financial independence. So you're kind of paying it forward and spreading the wealth and helping everybody else kind of raise their own financial well-being, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it gives me a good perspective because I've seen both sides of it. I've seen like the unhealthy side where it's like, hey, I just want to get away from this thing that I don't enjoy. I don't know what I'm going to spend my time doing in the future, but priority number one is get away from this job, right? Yeah. And then there's like the healthy retirement, which you see this with traditional retirees too. Is like they have something to retire to, right? Like they're starting a passion project, or they're volunteering, or they're spending more time with their grandkids. It's not just like, I'm going to quit my job and then there's this huge block of time, 8 to 5 every day that I don't know what I'm going to spend my time doing. Like that's a recipe for disaster, I think.
Right. And that's such a great point. And that's exactly what I wanted to get into a little bit here is what is FIRE? What does it mean to different people? What are the ways to go about it? Because I think for me, even as I started to look at it, however many years ago, I was a little confused as to what was going on. And it felt like that got really amplified. I'm curious your thoughts during COVID, where all of a sudden this concept of financial independence, which is in and of itself a great goal. We all want to be financially independent someday. We all want to retire. But it felt like during COVID, at least what you saw online was just a lot of disgruntled people who wanted to quit their jobs. And that's not what I get when I talk to folks like you and other folks that have like kind of gone about it in the healthy way. So can we just define what it is and talk a little bit about, some of the strategies? What is FIRE? How do you describe that to folks when you start talking about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, in a nutshell, FIRE is, saving and investing enough money that you can retire at an earlier age than normal. And, of course, we have to define like retire. It's the ability to continue your lifestyle without earned income. So essentially, your investments pay the bills. And obviously, to get to that point in your 40s or your 50s, you have to invest a lot of money. Like a lot of people in the FIRE communities are doing, they're investing 40, 50, 60% of their income, just kind of barreling full speed at this financial independence goal. And you have to invest aggressively. You need a lot of growth, and you need a lot of discretionary income to invest to be able to hit that target, in your 50s or 40s. But that's really it, is getting that point. And like kind of the target off in the distance is what they call the F.I.R.E number. And you can calculate your F.I.R.E number pretty loosely by just multiplying your household expenses by 25. So, there's a rule of thumb called the 4% rule that basically says you can withdraw 4% from a portfolio, and have a very low risk of depleting it over time. So, the inverse of 4% is 25. So, how much money do I need to amass? Oh, it's 25 times my annual living expenses. And of course that ignores taxes, and that ignores asset allocation and things like that. A lot of nuance is lost in it, but as far as back of the napkin math, that's kind of the target that everybody shoots for.
And that's a good place to start. So if somebody's thinking about when they might be financially independent, they could just think about what their current expenses are, multiply that by 25, and that would give you kind of a starting point of the amount of money that I might need in the future to become financially independent.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's this paradigm out there that's like, oh, I need $10 million to be financially independent, or like I just throw out a absurd number because I have no idea how to calculate it. But, for 99% of the people, that's just not the case. I mean, if you spend $100,000 a year, that's only $2.5 million. And I say only $2.5 million because that's a lot of money. But, you know, it's not 10 million. It's not impossible. Yeah. It's really hard to accomplish that. You need a high income and you need to save most of that income, but it's achievable.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Right. So again, I think all of us want to become financially independent. And even if we're not looking to retire early, just thinking about when will I be financially independent is probably a great exercise for all of us right now to just go ahead and do that math and think about whatever that number is. Because you're right. I think a lot of people, even in a traditional retirement sense, in conversations that we have, they think they need X and they have no idea what X means, how to come up with the number, and how to think about it. So that's a pretty good starting point. When you think about, or I guess my question is, what FIRE isn't? So I go back to this point in time, after COVID really kicked off, it felt like FIRE was everywhere. Everybody was ready to quit what they were doing. And I think maybe it's a reaction to being in lockdown and having some of that uncertainty about what the future holds. And some of it might have been positive, where it's like, look, what's important to me and what do I want to do with the rest of the time that I have, right? That's all a lot of self-reflection that's probably positive. But it felt like it got kind of co-opted by invest in crypto, start an Amazon marketplace, and it became this like flashy FIRE. I don't know how to describe this, maybe unhealthy version of it. Did you get a sense that was going on? And were you kind of shaking your head at some of what you were seeing over that period of time as well? Or is it just what my algorithm was putting in front of me?
No, there was definitely some absurdity out there. Like what comes to mind for me is like the meme stocks, GameStop, right, AMC, all that stuff. And everybody's like, to the moon, I'm going to get super rich if I invest $100 in GameStop or whatever. But, it's just like, sound investing just went out the window.
Yeah. And that, again, what you're talking about is doing math, right? And calculating what you might need and making some assumptions and asset allocation, some of the things you mentioned in passing. There's a lot of nuance to it. And somehow it blended into these meme stocks and stonks. And that became the path towards financial independence. And I just remember thinking to myself, I'm like, something's not, connecting here. So again, what I want hopefully people to take away is there's a healthy way of going about doing this, and we can all sit down and kind of find a healthy path towards financial independence. And thinking about how much you're spending is a good starting point for all of us to kind of go from. So once we know what that number is, what should we do from there?
Yeah. So once you have that number out there as a target, it's basically just backing into, like, there's all sorts of rate of return calculators or compound growth calculators on the internet. And it's like, okay, if I want, X amount of money and I have this amount to invest, how long does it take me to get there? At a 8 to 10% rate of return on average. So once you have that number, you can kind of reverse engineer it and say, how much do I need to invest to reach that number in 10 years? Or you can solve for, I have this much available to invest every month. How long will it take me to get that number? Right. Mm-hmm. So you just kind of solve for the missing variable and figure out what your timeline looks like. And then from there, you can get really creative with the spreadsheets. Like, okay, what if I cut out, this subscription that's not giving me any value and it's $150 a month? How much faster does that get me to that number? And then you start kind of, at some point you essentially place months or years of your life, or you place spending in terms of months or years of your life, right? So if I were to go out and buy a new car tomorrow and it cost me $30,000, how much does that delay my timeline? How much additional time am I going to have to work because of that decision? So ultimately, like these decisions that we make with earning, saving, spending, it really costs us time of our life. And, if we're spending our days doing something that we want to do, great. Like, maybe we don't care. Maybe we want to do what we're doing forever. But, in the true mathematical sense, it does delay the financial independence timeline.
Right. Right. Which is a really great way to think about it. I think oftentimes as advisors or as an industry, we do stupid things like tell people stop drinking Starbucks, because it's expensive. But I think that's tough for people to contextualize, really get their arms around, well, why does it matter? other guests on the podcast have come up with things like having a money mission statement and really defining as a person or as a partner what your money is for, and that helps provide a context to make financial decisions around. And I think this is another great way of thinking about it, is that all the decisions that we make affect something in this calculation. And so you can actually quantify that decision. If you're going to spend X on Y, then it's going to delay your financial independence date by X time. And you can figure this out through all these spreadsheets that you kind of can play around with, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, one other thing I want to point out is that a lot of people, like for me, I didn't have an idea of what I wanted to spend my time doing after financial independence. So it was always kind of gnawing at me in the back of my mind. Like, yeah, you can quit your job, but what are you going to fill your time with? I was like,
right.
If I just sit around and work out and play video games all day, like that sounds pretty unfulfilling. I'm probably going to get bored and have kind of like an existential life crisis at some point. So you're just kind of building this uncomfortable situation. But, so a lot of folks, like I said, the most successful people in the financial independence community or even traditional retirees, they have an idea of like, I want to go start a business. And actually, one of my clients, she started a financial coaching business on the side. So she's at that kind of, at that crux where, do I continue doing my day job and just kind of like leave my business as a side gig? Or am I FI enough where I can just, essentially quit my job? I don't have to save anything else for retirement because my portfolio is just coasting, and it's going to retire me at normal age, even if I never invest another dollar. And I can afford to take a huge pay cut and just start this business from scratch. So I think a lot of people fall into the trap of like, I need to be fully financially independent before I do anything else with my life. Like I can't give up this high paying salary until I am fully financially independent. But right. I think there's a lot of wisdom in knowing what's FI enough. And for a lot of people, that's coast FI. And that's basically defined as, even if you never invested another dollar, you could retire at standard retirement age based on your existing portfolio. So what that allows you to do is take a huge pay cut if you want to. And as long as you cover your living expenses, that's all you need.
And what did you describe that as?
So that's called coast FI or coast FIRE because because your portfolio is essentially coasting to retirement. Right. You're not adding, or you don't have to add anything to it. So you're basically
additional income that you're generating from something that we're going to assume is something you want to be doing, that is fulfilling, that is you're passionate about. Because of that additional income, it's taking the burden off the portfolio, and you're doing something you love. Your portfolio is coasting, and you're just truly independent because you're doing what you want to be doing. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it relieves the pressure of like, hey, I need to be pulling in $150,000 or $200,000. Just so I can save a bunch of money. It's like, well, if you remove the saving component, all you need to do is cover your living expenses. And if you can do that with something you're passionate about, or something you're passionate about plus a little part-time job, then, why not do that instead of just grinding it out until full financial independence, right?
And that's exactly the kind of the journey that you went on, right? I mean, it sounded like you started out as a fully FIRE, I'm moving away from this as soon as I possibly can so I don't have to do anything anymore, to finding something you're passionate about in that journey and applying it now to your practice. And now you're coast FIRE. Would you say you're in that camp yourself personally?
Yeah, I think we're pretty close. Just running the numbers at a high level, but yeah, exactly. That's my situation. So I could have been grinding it out for another 7 or 8 years and then, kind of pushed my dreams off, like starting a business to that point when we were like set for life. But, I would have wasted 7 or 8 years doing something I didn't want to do. So, like I said, the COVID situation just really put things in perspective for me and said, hey, none of us is promised tomorrow. Like, if you've got an idea, if you've got something that you want to pursue, like get to it, right? There's no guarantees.
Yeah, for sure. So just to kind of recap a little bit, I think first and foremost, people should be taking away that these are knowable numbers, right? You should be able to understand what your household expenses are as a starting point. You should be able to multiply that by 25 and come up with a number that gets you close to where you might be financially independent. And secondly, I think what I'm hearing from you, which is really, really important, is spending some time thinking about what's really important to you, what you enjoy doing, what you want to do with the rest of your life. All those big, meaningful questions, which are probably much more difficult to answer than just figuring out your expenses and multiplying by 25. That's probably like the easy starting point. But do you have any recommendations for people that are struggling with that second part? Like what would I do if I wanted to coast, but I just don't know what I would do or where I would start?
Yeah, that's a good question as to like, what do I want to spend the rest of my life doing and how to get to that? You really just have to try new things and speak to different people and kind of let random chance work itself out. I mean, you can start with your interests. Are you big into working out? Like, do you think about yourself being a personal trainer someday or something that earns a lot less money than, the tech job that you're working right now? But, you feel like you're helping more people or you're more passionate about, like,
right.
Start with your hobbies and interests and say, like, is there any way that I can use this to help people, or I can use this to enjoy what I'm doing and maybe make a little bit of money at it.
Right.
So, if it's something that's totally just doesn't make any money, like if you're passionate about volunteering, right? Like you probably need to get to full financial independence, but before you volunteer full time, but
right.
Maybe nonprofit work, maybe it makes, it doesn't make as much as your tech job, but maybe it makes enough to cover most or all of your living expenses. So you don't need to be fully financially independent before you make that leap, right?
Right. So asking yourself that question, if I didn't have to do it for the money, if I didn't need the paycheck, what would I do? Or would I still be doing this? Right. That's probably the opposite of that question, or a good starting point for folks. Would you continue to do what you're doing right now if you weren't making any money doing it? Yeah. I think for a lot of folks, probably answer that question is no as a starting point.
I ask all my clients in our goal setting meeting, if you had enough money to fund your lifestyle expenses for the rest of your life, would you continue doing what you're doing 9 to 5, or would you switch and do something totally different? Mm-hmm. And it's pretty rare. I mean, it's probably 10% of the people that say, no, I'd continue doing exactly what I'm doing right now. But so that means 90% of the people, if they had the choice, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing, right? They're spending their time just for a paycheck. And it's like, well, you could go for financial independence as quickly as possible, or you could figure out something else to do that you enjoy a little bit more and maybe isn't as much of a grind.
Right. And that's why I think the conversation and the philosophy is so important for people to understand, is because there are so many people that are in that situation that you just described. I think it's a lot of us, maybe not me and you in particular, the proverbial us. A lot of us are sitting around doing things that maybe we wouldn't do otherwise if it weren't for the money. And I think the concept gives us a roadmap to start thinking about getting to a point where we can feel most happy, most fulfilled, doing the things that we want to do. Again, because life is short. So we all deserve the opportunity to get ourselves into that position, right? So I think it's great. I'm curious if there's anything specific that people should be thinking about if they want to embark on this journey. So obviously, understanding what your living expenses are and being really critical about the things that you need is really important. You have to live within your means or this does not work, right? You start talking about saving 40, 50+% of your income, saving and investing those percentages. You're really taking living within your means to the extreme for the goal of moving that date that you're financially independent as close as possible. Are there any other things that people should be considering before they start down this journey besides just tightening the bootstraps, so to speak?
Yeah, good question. I think that, in order to reach that goal as quickly as possible, that, obviously on an accelerated timeline from average, you really have to be as efficient as possible. And that means that the fees that you're paying on your investments have to be minimal because those are going to drag on your returns and extend your timeline. The taxes, you have to have your tax situation optimized. So am I doing everything I can to minimize my tax burden? Am I being as tax efficient as possible? Am I making the right choice between Roth versus traditional, for example? And then kind of to take a tangent on the taxes is like, okay, Roth and traditional accounts, retirement accounts, I can't easily access until 59 and a half. So how am I going to bridge my time, right? There's other accounts that you can access quickly, like a taxable brokerage account. A lot of people use that to bridge to early retirement. So, making sure you're investing in the right types of accounts, making sure that your taxes are as low as possible and your fees are not dragging on performance are three of the big things. But those are all offense, right? Like those are all kind of chasing the opportunity of building wealth. But I think that a lot of people, myself included, previously kind of didn't pay attention to the defense aspect of it. And what I mean by that is preventing really bad things from happening, because we're setting ourselves up for success, but we also need to play defense with life insurance, disability insurance, umbrella insurance, things like these. Make sure that we're adequately covered, because, if we're chasing the stream of fire and, somebody in the household that's an income earner becomes disabled, it's like, well, if we don't have disability insurance, everything's off the rails. Like goodbye early retirement, goodbye standard retirement, possibly. It's like, you need to make sure your bases are covered from that perspective as well.
Right. That's great. So being proactively efficient, making sure your money's going to the right types of places for the right reasons, to make sure you understand where your liquidity is going to come from. If you can't access your accounts for 10 or 15 years, if you're really pulling the trigger and retiring early because you can't get at the 401ks or IRAs without penalties. And then sounds like just making sure you're doing the proper planning for the what ifs, right? The rainy days and the things that could come up is super critical.
Exactly. And this is all standard financial planning stuff that professionals cover, but it's especially important to optimize for early retirement and pay attention to those things. I know the early retirement crowd is, kind of hardcore DIY because, financial advisors cost money and that money doesn't get invested if you're paying an advisor, but you really need to make sure that your bases are covered from those other perspectives. And one other thing I want to point out is that, technically there are ways to get at retirement accounts early without penalty, right? Like if you got a pre-tax 401k, technically you can roll it to an IRA and you could do the Roth conversion ladder, or you can set up SEPP withdrawals. These are all terms that you can Google and learn more about them. But, it requires a little bit of jumping through hoops, whereas the taxable brokerage account is, essentially none of that. You just withdraw the money and you could fund your lifestyle expenses that way. So, I think it all needs to be part of an integrated strategy. If you're going to use the Roth conversion ladder, make sure that you're working with somebody or diligently doing it yourself to, plan out that as you get to that retirement date, you have enough money in each bucket to where, you can withdraw it without penalty and you can execute your plan.
Yeah, that's great. Can I ask you a personal question? And feel free not to want to share the answer to this, but you're married, obviously. Was your wife always on board with this? When you came home with the spreadsheet, was she like, yeah, Alan, that sounds great? Or was she like, you want me to save how much? We have to make some big changes around here.
Yeah, I love that question. I think, no, to answer your question, she was on board, but I think the reason she was on board is the way that I approached it. So, I didn't just go home and say like, hey, listen, we need to cut back and you need to stop buying your shoes and you need to stop getting your nails done and all this stuff, right? Like I wasn't being restrictive. I basically went home with a chart that said like, hey, look at this. Like, you don't particularly like your job. I don't like mine. If we invest this amount per month, we can be financially independent in our early 40s, right? Like, isn't that awesome? And she's like, yeah, that is awesome. Let's do it. So at that point, we had to start backing into like, okay, how are we going to achieve these investment goals? And then from there, it was more of a collaborative approach as to how do we free up this money so that we can invest it every month, rather than me saying like, you spend too much on X, Y, and Z, like you need to cut back.
Right. And again, that's where I go back to the context that you're having that conversation with. So I think, unfortunately, sometimes when we get into these budget conversations, either personally or professionally, we're just telling other people how to spend their money. And if there's no agreement on what that end goal or that why is, it just becomes this giant finger pointing contest, and it's not healthy for anybody. It's not a great experience. So I'm grateful that you were willing to share your experience there. And maybe a word of caution to folks: you really should maybe think about how you're talking to your partner if you're in a relationship about this, because I'm sure it's not the easiest thing to do, to give up some of the things that you have to really, again, put away the amount of money you need to get to that goal. It can be challenging. So, do you have any advice for folks that are thinking about this as they enter into those conversations, or do we need a financial therapist maybe to join us on one of these calls for that?
Yeah, I'm definitely no financial therapist, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn last night. So yeah, as far as advice on that, like I don't really like I don't like the B word budget. I like to refer to it as like a conscious spending plan, because budget to me sounds like diet. Like it's very restrictive. Like I can't eat cupcakes anymore. Right. But it's like conscious spending plan is kind of like a nutrition plan, right? Like it's like, hey, as long as you're hitting your goals as far as, your macronutrients, like, yes, you can have a cupcake, right? And like with the budget or with the conscious spending plan, it's like, yes, you can go get your nails done, right? It's like, give every dollar a job. First, make sure that you're saving and investing enough. And then, like when my wife and I were, quote unquote budgeting, we both had discretionary funds. So there was a certain amount per month that was allocated to each of us. That was like, no questions asked, right? Like, we're not going to give the other partner a hard time if they spent their $300 on shoes or if they spend it on a spa day or whatever. So I think that's really important, is to earmark that money. And that way, every little purchase that the other person makes is not kind of like a argument point. And, there's going to be points in time where you spend a little bit more, and just give yourself some grace with that and just get back on track, right? You don't need to throw the whole budget out, but, just do the best you can. And like I said, make it a conscious spending plan that's aligned to your goals. Give every dollar a job rather than just trying to cut out everything that's pleasant.
Yeah, that's great advice. There's a ton in there. When you say give every dollar a job, it makes me think of YNAB, which is a budget app platform that's kind of built on the philosophy of giving every dollar a job. Are there any tools out there, websites, apps, things that you use or like to recommend that you think align with the FIRE philosophy really well, that you want to spotlight?
Yeah, great question. So there is a tool called FIRE Calc, and it basically helps you calculate your financial independence number. It helps you. There's all these different variables you can play with. So rather than building your own spreadsheet, you can just go to FIRE Calc and start plugging in your numbers and quickly have some high level answers for yourself. On the kind of tracking and monitoring expenses, I really like Monarch Money. I started using it recently with my clients, and it's kind of like Mint on steroids. Like Mint will categorize transactions for you, but it doesn't do the best job, and the links break and stuff. So Monarch Money seems to be a little bit better and a little bit more intelligent when it comes to that. And you can set up your spending plan. You can set up your goals. You can earmark savings. Like you can set up like a travel fund. So every month we're going to put $200 into our travel goal, and then that's going to fund our travel expenses. It's like a sinking fund. I'm a big fan of those too. So Monarch just makes it really easy to track and monitor your expenses as well as planning for those goals. So that'd be the two biggest tools I would recommend.
That's awesome. You mentioned the FIRE community. It's really robust. There's a lot going on in there. Are there any places that you would recommend people check out? Blogs, podcasts, a top couple that you would recommend people take a look at if they're interested in continuing to learn more?
Yeah, great question. I could probably spend an hour talking about this, but I'll boil it down. So I'll do a book, a podcast, and a blog. So for book, awesome. I would start folks off with The Simple Path to Wealth by J.L. Collins. It's right in the title. It's simple. There's a lot of nuance that's not included there, but for people who are not familiar with it, it gives just a fantastic overview of how to invest, why to invest, how to put your money to work for you, and highly recommend it for beginners. So that's the book. Awesome. Podcast, I would say Choose FI podcast. I had a really long commute there several years back, and I was just consuming this podcast and on the way to work and on the way from work, and it probably contributed to a lot of dissatisfaction at work. But great podcast nonetheless. They walk through a lot of these topics in depth, and are really great podcast hosts. So, and then the last one I'll give is a blog. So that would be Mr. Money Mustache. And I think that's actually the first FIRE related piece of content I ever saw, was an article called The Shockingly Simple Math Behind Early Retirement. And it basically says, like, at a certain savings rate, this is how many years you can retire, assuming you have like zero net worth right now. So it's like you're starting from zero. If you invest 50% of your income, for example, you can be financially free in 17 years. That's the one I remember. And then like, as you scale it up or down, the timeline changes. So that's what inspired me to like pop open the spreadsheet next and like start playing with scenarios and like, oh my God, I don't have to be like 9 to 5 till 65. Like I can get out early. This is awesome. So that's kind of what kicked it off for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I hope, if nothing else, people check out F.I.R.E Calc and like just go play with the numbers a little bit. Again, even if you're not looking to get out of your job or you're not really passionate about, FIRE in general, I think it's a great exercise for everybody. Just figure out what that number is and kind of where you are on your own journey to, even if it's a traditional retirement, it's a great starting point. So appreciate that. Is there anything we missed related to FIRE? You want to spotlight anything or anything you want to leave us with before we let you go?
Yeah, I'll just say that, the principles of financial independence aren't just for people who want to get out in their 40s. I think that, there's a lot of wisdom in the principles of, saving and investing, even if it's not 50% of your income. Like if you can take that 15% that you're currently investing and bump that up to 20, like that just gives you huge optionality in the future. So let's say, 20 years from now, you're 55 and you decide like, hey, you know what? I've changed my mind. I'm kind of all done. Like I've got a new boss. It's a nightmare to work for. Like, can I retire yet? It's like, well, if you've been contributing that 20%, maybe you can. Whereas, if you would have been putting away that 15%, maybe you'd have to just grind it out for like another 5 years in a really unpleasant situation. So it just gives you a lot of flexibility. Being financially independent, even if you don't want to retire early. And, that's really it. I think that everybody can take away something from those resources and apply that to their own life.
I agree.
I did have one question for you. Do you have a lot of clients, or have you had any clients that are like, hey, I want to retire as early as possible. How do I do that?
So I think what's so fascinating and interesting about this conversation to me is, again, everybody wants to be financially independent, but I think people don't want to do the work, right? They don't want to do the hard things to actually get there. So finding out what number you need to get to become financially independent is very easy. It's very straightforward, like you just described for us. But then when you change those numbers and you decide, try to determine what sacrifices that you have to make, that's where it becomes, I think, more difficult for people to actually implement a really aggressive plan. And that's fine too. I think that's not the path for everybody to spend or save and invest, 50 or 60% of their income towards this goal of expediting retirement. But I think I couldn't agree with the last point that you made about it is for everybody to start thinking about. And I think it's more powerful than people give it credit. Understanding where you need to get to in the future to have that optionality can be a really enlightening experience for a lot of people. Yeah. And we talked about, how do you answer that question? What's meaningful to me? What do I want to do with the rest of my life? I think that a lot of people have trouble answering that question because they're so locked in the situation that they hate to begin with, right? And it takes up a lot of mental capacity because they're miserable in their current job. So I think what's so intriguing about this, and where I try to put it in front of as many people as I can, even if they're not going to dramatically change their behavior, is to just introduce it. And I think for a lot of folks, it can be extremely helpful, even if they're not retiring at 45, but they're, opening a sandwich shop at 60 instead of working to 67. I mean, that's a win to me. And if that comes from understanding this concept, again, I'm all for putting it in front of people and trying to help them down that path. So I couldn't agree with your last statement more, that to me, it is for everybody to try to understand this. And it's not just trying to quit your job at 40, right? There's so much more to it that I think people can get out of it. So
yeah, that's very well said.
So I appreciate you being here. Maybe we can come back and keep talking FIRE in the future. I'd love to continue the conversation if you're down. One of the questions I like to ask everybody before I let you go officially, first of all, where do we find you? Where do you find your business? Any of your socials, anything you want to promote before we let you go?
Yeah. So, my business is 7 Saturdays Financial. It's just 7 Satarsfinancial.com. And then I am pretty active on social. LinkedIn and Twitter are probably the best places. So, LinkedIn, you can just search my name, Allen Mueller, and, Twitter, my handle is @7 Saturdays a week. 7 Saturdays a week is kind of my favorite analogy for financial independence because, you get to choose what you do every day. Every day is a Saturday. So that's where my handle came from, 7 Saturdays a week. on Twitter.
Cool. And finally, last question. This is a podcast and a blog about financial well-being, but well-being in general. We're both in personal finance. So aside from being diligent with budgeting, what other practices, or not budgeting, I shouldn't use the B word, conscious spending plan. What other, do you have any rituals, habits, things that you go back to that help you improve your well-being overall?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We can't be so focused on money and finances that we ignore the other aspects of well-being. So like health, emotional, mental, those are all super important. I think that health is wealth. What's the point of getting to early retirement in your 50s or whatever age if you're not healthy and mobile enough to enjoy it, right? So you really have to maintain those, physical fitness, eat a healthy diet. These things are all super important, because, again, like what's the point of all this money if you're not healthy enough to enjoy it? So make sure you're maintaining the other aspects of, holistic wellness. And, recently started reading a book called Outlive by, Peter Attia. Super interesting. Yeah. It's like, just talks all about longevity and how to stay healthier longer. And it's really fascinating. So I'm really digging that recently.
Yeah, that's great advice. So not only retire early, but be able to thrive in your retirement and do the things that you want to do because you're healthy and able to enjoy them the way that you want. That's great. Yeah. Great. I think that's probably a great way to wrap it up, man. Thank you again for the time. I hope people check out 7 Saturdays and wish you all the best as you continue to coast into retirement here, doing something you love. You're a great example of it. So thanks for joining us.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, you got it.